Prague off the beaten track, Vypohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.
Hello and welcome to Prague off the beaten track. Today I'm taking you to a place that lies right next to, or rather under, Vyšehrad, the historic fortress on the cliffs above the Vltava river. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you might remember the episode where, actually there were two episodes, where I explored Vyšehrad itself, its cemetery, its casemates, and I could say even its legends. You may also recall another episode about the part of Prague which is on the right-hand side of the river that is called Podskalí, and Výtoň, where I'm standing right now, is its integral part. And now, close to these two places, there's yet another landmark that really deserves attention. The steel railway bridge that locals simply call the Výtoň or the Vyšehrad bridge. At first glance, it may not look like much more than a practical piece of infrastructure. Trains have been rattling across its arches, originally painted dark green, now frankly quite faded and rusty, for about a century and a half. Meanwhile, joggers, cyclists and dog walkers made their way underneath the bridge on the embankment, often without giving it much thought. But in fact, the Výtoň bridge has been at the center of one of Prague's most heated debates in recent years. For a long time, the Czech Railway Authority argued that the old steel structure was no longer sufficient for modern transport needs, and they wanted to tear this bridge down and replace it with a brand new bridge that would carry 3 tracks instead of the current 2. But preservationists, architects and many Prague residents pushed back. Even UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, weighed in, stressing that the historic bridge contributes to the character of Prague's protected skyline, which was one of the reasons actually why Prague was placed on UNESCO's World Heritage List. And so the bridge should not be just casually sacrificed. The arguments went back and forth for years until in September 2025 the Czech government finally decided that the existing bridge will be kept, reconstructed and adapted to serve future traffic. But that's not the main reason why I'm here and why I chose it for this episode. What fascinates me about the Výtoň bridge is its history. So, while I'm walking across the river on one of the paths for pedestrians along the side of the rail lines, let me tell you a little bit about the history, not only of this bridge, but of how the Vltava itself needed to be bridged for railway transport back in the 19th century. Actually, the very first kind of bridge wasn't really a bridge at all, because during the turbulent year of 1848, when Prague was shaken by an uprising, by a revolution like many other European cities and capitals, and here, of course, the uprising was against Habsburg rule, local raftsmen actually at that time built a pontoon kind of structure from their timber rafts between Výtoň and Smíchov. It was meant to bring reinforcements into the city. The revolt was quickly crushed and the improvised crossing was dismantled. Its wood was chopped up for heating and building. Still, even though it lasted only days, their temporary construction kind of foreshadowed what was to come. It would take nearly 2 decades after this first kind of improvised bridge before serious plans for a permanent railway connection appeared. By the mid-19th century, Prague was a sort of a patchwork of rail lines that were ending at separate stations and they were not connected. So that meant that cargo trains had to unload goods, then reload them onto carts and wagons, transport them across the city to another railway station where they would be loaded again on another train, and that of course was very costly and time-consuming process. It is true that Prague already at that time had one major railway bridge, the Negrelli Viaduct, which was completed in 1850. It is more than a kilometer long, and it was and still is a very impressive piece of engineering. However, it crossed the Vltava much further downstream near Karlín, and it wasn't suitable to link the Western Railway, where trains were coming from Pilsen, Western Bohemia, and actually Bavaria later as well, to the other stations which were on the right-hand side of the river. There was another element or factor. The Austrian army demanded a better solution too, since the lack of a through-line, railway line in Prague made troop movements painfully slow, and that was something that became very obvious during the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, which Austria lost, and with that it actually lost its kind of dominant position in the German-speaking part of Europe. So, here in Prague, several competing ideas were put on the table. I think two of them at least needs to be mentioned. One route would have sent the railway from Smíchov on the left-hand side of the river across the slopes of Petřín through Malá Strana, or the Lesser Quarter, under the Prague Castle, and then on to Bubny and Holešovice. If that plan had gone ahead, it would have completely changed the character of what is today, I think, the most picturesque part of Prague. Entire rows of old houses would likely have been demolished to make way for the tracks, and heavy industry might have followed the railway right into the neighborhood of Malá Strana. So instead of this sort of a postcard view of Charles Bridge that we have today, which is framed by Baroque palaces and winding streets, Malá Strana could easily have ended up as a smoky railway corridor, which probably wouldn't be so popular with tourists as it is now in the 21st century. Another proposal suggested building a new bridge near Střelecký or Archer's Island with a line that would be running straight along today's Národní třída and Příkopy into the heart of the city. So, I think quite unsurprisingly, both these ideas caused outrage even at that time, because nobody wanted steam trains cutting through Prague's historic center. After many years of heated discussions, a more daring but ultimately more practical concept won out. Build a steel bridge under Vyšehrad, right here, cut through the Nusle Valley and continue by a brand new tunnel under Vinohrady to the freshly built Franz Josef Station, which is today's the Prague main railway station, or Labák. The plan had its risks, but also clear advantages. The Nusle Valley at that time wasn't part of Prague. It was a sort of a patchwork of gardens and untamed corners along the Botič stream. So buying up land posed no big problem. The bridge itself, however, sparked debate because, there were people who argued that it should be made of cheaper wood, but there were obvious dangers, of floods or fire. So should it be made of stone? Other people argued it would be very, very costly. So in the end, the decision went in favor of a combination of stone and steel, which was a modern, durable material, and of course a symbol of industrial progress. And with that, Prague gained this sixth, at that time, bridge across the Vltava, and only its second dedicated to railway transport. It was finished and opened in 1872, but it soon became clear that it wasn't enough for the growing demands of rail transport. By the end of the century, engineers faced the delicate challenge how to replace the old single-track bridge with a sturdier two-track one without completely disrupting traffic across the Vltava. Their solution, needs to be said, was bold but kind of elegant. They kept the original stone pillars rising from the river and simply built a new, broader steel structure on top of them. That way, trains could continue to cross the river with only minimal interruptions during construction, and that was a remarkable feat for that time. So the new bridge was completed in 1901, and it was more than just practical. Its 3 sweeping steel arches that we still have here today gave it a sense of balance and proportion that I would even say almost suggest a nonchalance. For a piece of heavy infrastructure, it had a surprising grace, and standing under Vyšehrad with the fortress above and the river flowing below, the bridge seemed kind of to fit naturally into the Prague landscape. More than a century later, even with its paint peeling and its girders rusting, I think that combination of strength and elegance is still what makes the Výtoň bridge such a distinctive landmark. Let me just finish this little kind of excursion into history by mentioning that through the turbulent decades of the 20th century, the bridge remained firmly in place. It survived both world wars. Under communism, it just, I think, as far as I remember, it became simply part of the city's working infrastructure. It was neither celebrated nor neglected. But it was, I think, still a little bit more than just one of the many steel arteries that kept Prague moving. I think for people living in Prague, it became a familiar kind of companion, a solid structure that you cycled under on your way to work or crossed on foot along its pedestrian paths. It turned into an organic part of a daily life. It was kind of stitched so naturally into the rhythm of the city that most people, I think, hardly noticed that it was there until suddenly they were told that it might be torn down. So no wonder that the debates became so heated. For many Prague residents, it wasn't just about steel and rivets, but about, I think, memory, identity, and the feeling that this old structure could still serve the heavy railway traffic of the 21st century if only it was given a chance. And today, on this beautiful Indian summer September day, it's clear that people really love coming here for a, leisurely stroll to take pictures of the skyline with, if I look at the downstream towards the center of the city, I have Palacký Bridge in the foreground and the other Prague bridges stretching away into the distance. It's a kind of unmistakable view and a very pleasant walk. So, if you'd like to appreciate not only a bit of technical history, but I think also social history of Prague, I really suggest that you come down here to the Výtoň or Vyšehrad railway bridge and maybe continue your walk back to the center along the Náplavka embankment. That's it for today's episode of Prague of the Beaten Track. As always, you will find more information, some photographs, a fact box and practical map on the Prague of the Beaten Track page at the Radio Prague International website.
Prague off the beaten track. Vít Bohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.